What's up, guys? Toad back again. The last episode of Better Off Dead for this week, NFL Week 10. And we got two plays just like last week, but hopefully it's not like last week at all, in that I went 0-2 last week, where I thought that the situations lined up pretty nicely in those, but Arizona, man, I mean, they had Clayton Tune starting for them at quarterback, and he was not in tune whatsoever, and it was just awful. He had multiple turnovers in the game. You just can't do that and expect to win an NFL game like that. That was just horrible, awful. What can you do about that? They put 0 points on the board. They were only down 13, so they were still within like the bigger of the numbers at least. Although I took them at 11.5, I think. They had gone up to a 13-point dog at some point before the game kicked off, but they were still within 13 into the third quarter, I think. Cleveland's offense, they're not a very good offensive team, really. They're mostly a defensive team, and their offense didn't do that much against a not very good Arizona defense. But even so, that did not work out well. Way too many turnovers there, and too many turnovers in the other game as well. Buffalo, I thought that was a nice spot for them to avenge getting knocked out of the playoffs last year in their own house. That emotional game coming in there, having last played in Cincinnati in that DeMar Hamlin situation game, and it was just not to be. Josh Allen, he seems to just throw just crucial interceptions, and that was the case in that game. I think if one of those interceptions doesn't happen, I think Buffalo might wind up winning that game. It's just very unfortunate. I thought that was a nice situation there. We move on from that, and we got NFL Week 10 to discuss now. And let's look at what we got here. The first one, probably the one of these two plays that I like a little bit better, maybe. But the first one is going to be the Houston Texans +7, and this one, yeah, I mean, you might say, like, I'll look at the market first, I guess. But yeah, the Houston Texans. So this one has actually gone down from an 8. It's going through the 7 down to 6.5. It looks like it's mostly 6.5s out there. I was able to snare like a spare 7 that was still around there. I don't know if it might still hit 7. You can wait around if you think you might still be able to get a 7 somewhere. It's possible. I still kind of like it at 6.5 too. Bengals here have 84% of the tickets, but only 71% of the cash. So the public is back on the Bengals, man. That Bengals hype train with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, it's back on after they've looked really good the last few weeks. So the hype train is back on the Cincinnati Bengals. And even though C.J. Stroud also certainly has hype on him, he's going to win Rookie of the Year, and he had an amazing performance last week, although it was against Tampa. Not a very good defense at all, really, but an insanely good performance for C.J. Stroud. He's got Rookie of the Year wrapped up. He had a huge game, over 400 yards passing, destroyed my ass in fantasy, which is terrible. He single-handedly beat me in fantasy pretty much. Probably had about 50 fantasy points, which is just ridiculous. So that's the one thing that gives me a little bit of hesitation here, that Houston's offense has been doing well and does look really good, and they are the type of offense that recreational bettors do kind of like and want to look at, and they do love Stroud, but probably not when it's against the Cincinnati Bengals, who everybody love even more than that. They love Joe Burrow. Cincinnati, they've been a playoff team last few years, made the Super Bowl a couple years back. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows how good Cincinnati is, but I think this is a bad spot for Cincinnati. So Cincinnati, they come into this game, they're coming off multiple big wins in a row, I would say. And I went against them last week because I thought that it was not that great of a spot, because they had gone out to the West Coast, beat the San Francisco 49ers, and then came back home. But it was a game that they're going to still be focused for because it's against the Buffalo Bills. I just thought the Bills had more motivation than Cincinnati did in that one. And we're getting a little bit of value on that line there. But Cincinnati, they got out to an early lead, and they were able to hold on and wound up winning that game. It's another big win against another one of the top teams in the AFC, and Cincinnati kind of needs these wins because of their bad start to the season. So coming off those two games now, I think this is just not a good spot for them. They have to face Houston, who is a team, even though Stroud's been on fire and their offense has been on fire, this might be a down spot, man, because they're coming off San Francisco, Buffalo, and there's a primetime game against Buffalo, so they have a little bit less rest because of that, and that's a game you really get up for in primetime, and it was at home, big game there. And up next, they have the Baltimore Ravens, who are leading their division, and they have the Steelers after that, who are ahead of them in the division as well. So their division rivals coming up. Baltimore, basically their challenger, and I think everybody kind of sees this division boiling down to Baltimore versus Cincinnati still. So that's a big game for Cincinnati. Coming up against the Ravens, I think this is a spot where they're favored by a little too much here, and they might overlook the Texans. This is a lot of points to be giving with a Cincinnati team, even though Cincinnati's offense is probably going to be able to score against a Houston defense that's not very good. I don't know, man. It's a lot of points to be laying against a team that can also score and can kind of score on pace with you. And I think Houston might be able to do that, especially with Cincinnati being in a spot where they might not be 100% focused here. Cincinnati, I will also point out that game at the 49ers, of course, they beat the 49ers, and the 49ers had kind of entered that skid where that was, I believe, the 49ers' third loss in a row. 49ers were dealing with injury concerns, dealing with Deebo Samuel being injured, and they were just not a complete 49er team, at least. So maybe that win isn't quite as good as it looks for Cincinnati. And prior to that game where they beat the Bills, they actually had 0 wins in the AFC, although some of that is a product of the fact that they've had this schedule like jammed with NFC teams right away, which is kind of an odd situation. But even so, they had not won against an AFC team until that game against the Bills. So I think this is a sandwich. They're coming off that game against Buffalo, big win against one of the top teams in the conference. They have a huge game against the division leader in the AFC North up next, and one of their main rivals in the Ravens. It's possible they could look past the Texans here, man. The Texans sitting at 4-4 might be a little bit of extra motivation there because it looks a lot better when you're above 500 than when you're below 500. And the Texans, I mean, yeah, they're coming off a win where everybody knows that their offense was totally on fire in that game, but it is also still a game where they almost lost the game, and they had to score that touchdown like right at the end late, which it was just kind of an odd. It was a lot of that was an odd situation in that game. They got that touchdown right at the end, and Fairbairn, the kicker for Houston, had gone down earlier in the game to an injury. And Houston, it was just kind of an odd decision at the end of that game because, yeah, it was back and forth at the end of it. They scored a touchdown basically with like almost no time left in the game, with 6 seconds, I think. Fairbairn was out of the game, but they had a running back kicking who had actually made like a 30-something yard field goal that was pretty crucial in the game, late in the game. They didn't want him to come back out to kick the extra point. And not only that, but on that last touchdown that they got moved up to the 1-yard line for the PAT, I believe, because I think there was a 15-yard penalty, like an unsportsmanlike conduct or something on Tampa. So that put Houston at the 1, so it was a chip shot field goal, and you had your running back who was filling in for kicker who had already made like a 30-something yard field goal. So like a PAT from the 1-yard line is a lot easier to make than that. And they still had their long kicker available because they still had their kicker who was doing the kickoffs in the game. So I don't know why. And they still also had the option to try to run it into the end zone for 2 points. They didn't do any of that, which was unfortunate for people like me, even though I didn't have money on the game. But I picked in my pools, I had Houston -2.5 in some of these pools. And that was just a bizarre situation where it's like they score that touchdown. You're like, yep, they just won by 3. Oh, wait, I forgot. Their kicker is injured. So now what's going to happen? Well, they get moved up to the 1-yard line. Let's just chip shot this extra point and let's go. Let's go up by 3 because you still, I think, want to go up by 3 because you're going to have to kick it off. And even though you might squib it, you never know what's going to happen, really. Like, it's possible that Tampa will get, like, one untimed down at that point, and something crazy might happen, and they might be able to do something to maybe get into field goal range. Who knows? But no, Houston decides that they're just going to kneel on it and not even attempt anything, even though it's highly unlikely that whatever they do is going to be blocked or result in a turnover and be returned all the way back the other way for 2. I thought that decision was weird enough to the point where it almost seemed like there might have been somebody in Houston's coaching staff or something who had money on the other side there on Tampa. I really don't know. I don't know what was going on there. It was just kind of an odd situation there. But that all aside, that doesn't really have any bearing on this game. I like Houston plus the 7. I was able to snag like a 7 that was out there, a stray 7 that was sitting around. I still kind of like it at 6.5 as well. I think the line's a bit too high. I think everybody's thinking the Bengals are back. They've looked really good recently, even though Stroud has all that hype. The Bengals have more hype than that, and I think it's a bad spot for the Bengals, sandwiched in there between the Buffalo Bills and the Baltimore Ravens. It's a spot where the Bengals might just let their guard down a little bit against the Houston Texans. So that's the way I'm looking in that one. Houston Texans plus 7 or plus 6.5. And the other one, you're going to think that I'm off my rocker. Toad, you might say, what are you, off your meds, bro? Like, how could you possibly do this? What is wrong with you? Yeah, it's going to be on the New York Giants plus 16.5. The biggest line that's on the board there by far. Man, I mean, it's one of the ugliest possible plays you can do, but you're getting so many points here, and the situation kind of dictates it. It's like, I just can't pass this up, man. I think the number has just gone too far. Like, there's no value to be had on the Dallas Cowboys here, which is who they're playing. And there are a few reasons for this and a few reasons why the number is where it is. You might also want to stick around because it's possible this hits a 17 somewhere. I like it at either number. The 17 is a lot less key than 7 is, really, because once you get into those higher numbers, they mean a little bit less. But if you can get a 17, you might be able to find that around. I would say maybe take that as well. I'm on the 16.5. Here you can see the Cowboys have 91% of the tickets, but 88% of the cash. This has shifted a little bit, but either way, the Cowboys are going to be the public team. Nobody's going to want anything to do with the Giants, who look like maybe the worst team in football. They look so horrifically ugly, and everybody knows how good the Cowboys are. But the Cowboys, when you're a team that has so much name recognition, you tend to be an overvalued commodity, and I think that's certainly going to be the case in this situation here. This is in the later afternoon slate here on Sunday. What's the situation here? The Dallas Cowboys, first of all, I think they're in a negative situation. They're coming off a huge game against the Philadelphia Eagles, where if they had won that game, they'd be 6-2, and they would have knocked Philadelphia, I guess, down to 7-2. So the division would be a lot closer than it is. They would have been within striking distance of Philadelphia, but now that really puts Philadelphia in the driver's seat to the point where it looks like Dallas is going to have to shoot for a wild card spot in the playoffs at this point. So that's kind of a devastating loss for Dallas, and they had chances to win that game, man. It was close. It got close. I said that I liked the Eagles in that one, but it got pretty close there, and it could have gone kind of either way at the end, but that was a huge game. And it was a game, it was, I think, kind of in the later slate of the 4 or whatever p.m. games Eastern. So it was the one game that was still on when the other games had finished. So it kind of became this isolated game when it came down the stretch. And I think everybody had eyes on it and were watching it. That was the biggest game of the week too. So that was a huge game. And I think it's going to be a hangover spot for Dallas. And it's you had that huge game like that and you fell just short. Are you really going to be focused on a Giants team that just has not been able to do anything right? And not only that, but the other thing that adds to this situation is this is a Giants team that Dallas went into their house the opening week, and it was a primetime game, and they beat them 40-0. So how is Dallas going to be able to take the Giants seriously at all here? You're coming off that huge game, that loss that's going to be tough to bounce back from, and you got a team that you absolutely smoked in their own house, just absolutely destroyed them. So that's going to put the Giants in this in-division road reversal revenge angle, which is kind of a strong angle in the NFL. When you have a team that lost to a divisional opponent in their own house, and then they get to play them again on the road later in the season, And especially when they're in an underdog role, that team tends to be a pretty good play, and that's the situation the Giants are in here. They got destroyed in their own house by this Dallas team. They're certainly going to remember that, and so that's they're going to have that little bit of extra motivation there, and it might make Dallas take them even a little bit less seriously. But not only that, but there's no reason to take the Giants seriously at all. Adding to that factor, the Giants have just looked horrific pretty much the whole season, but in the last game especially, they got absolutely destroyed by the Raiders, and I think there are a few factors involved in that. The Raiders, I think, came out as a motivated team. I probably should have bet the Raiders in that game, looking at the situation. Just in hindsight, the Raiders had fired Josh McDaniels, who I had been saying that they were going to fire him for a while, for the past couple weeks, the few weeks leading up to that. They finally did it, and I think the players really did not like McDaniels, because as soon as he got fired, they showed up, man. Even though it was against a bad Giants team, they pounded them 30-6. Raiders showed up. The Raiders were in a good spot, I felt, there, and the Giants, if anything, might have been in kind of a sandwich spot, really, because they had blown the Battle of New York the previous week against the Jets, or that was the game where they were winning. They gave up the lead and then wound up losing in overtime to the Jets, who are their cross-city rival there, and they had this huge game against Dallas coming up next, so it was all kind of a negative for the Giants there, and it was a positive for the Raiders, and I think the Raiders were coming off if I remember correctly, I think they were coming off an ugly performance themselves the week before that too. So it all lined up really nicely on the Raiders in that one. So that can kind of explain that loss. But also, of course, the Giants lost Daniel Jones in that game. So that's going to also factor into this game. So Daniel Jones is out. So he's out, so that might make the Cowboys take the Giants even less seriously here, because Cowboys are probably thinking, and bettors are probably thinking, we beat this team by 40 points in their own house when they had him starting. I believe Jones was the starting quarterback to start the season in that game. Now, without him, it seems like, we're just going to be able to beat this team easily in our own house and without their starting quarterback against some rookie, making his debut. Yeah, that. I don't think there's any reason for the Cowboys to take the Giants seriously at all. And it's the injured player theory now for the Giants, because their quarterback is now out. That affects the line. I don't know what the look ahead was for this. I don't know. Maybe I have it. Do I have the look ahead lines here? I might. Actually, I think I do. So the look ahead on this was, do I have it here? Was 10. Giants at Cowboys, it was 10. So with Jones out, the books are saying that the drop-off between Jones and rookie Danny DeVito. Wait, is that who it is? They're playing an Italian midget at quarterback. Danny DeVito. No, it's Tommy DeVito. Oh, so it's still a short Italian. Joe Pesci from Goodfellas is in there for the Giants. You got some mob family. At least he's got those mob connections, man. Tommy DeVito. No, that is actually this guy's name, Tommy DeVito. Just total Goodfella vibes. I know that he played for Illinois in college. I think he played somewhere else too. I don't even know where he played. I don't know who he really is, but I think the line move is going to be an overreaction, because it's the injured player there. When you have Jones out, Jones is just not really a good quarterback. Is he 6 points better than any quarterback, really? I don't know. And I think Tyrod Taylor, because Tyrod Taylor has been their back. I mean, he's played in some games this season. I think he's injured now, so he's out. So that's why the Giants are going to DeVito here. But the one edge that the Giants are going to have in this game, even though when you have a rookie, they might have those those nervous jitters in their first NFL game. It's probably a nerve-wracking experience. Yeah, so there is that aspect, like we did see with Clayton Tune, much to my chagrin. Unfortunately, hey, maybe I should stop betting these guys in their NFL debuts. No, because I think it's more of a positive than a negative, because even though you do have that nervousness factor, the thing that you have going for you is not only that there's more value in the line, because the line is going to move, expecting not much out of you as a rookie quarterback who's completely unproven. So you're going to get some value in the number because of that. But also, there's no NFL game film on the guy, so the defense might not know really what to expect or what the team is going to throw at them. So they might not know what the Giants are going to have game plan for DeVito here. So that's the other little bit of edge they have here. Again, I think it's a bad spot for Dallas coming off that brutal loss against Philadelphia in a huge game. Now they have to play. They're playing at home against Giants team that they already just destroyed in New York by 40 points. I don't see how Dallas gets up for this game, really, in a situation like that with a rookie quarterback playing for them on top of that. I just don't see it, man. I think it's too many points. The line has moved 6 points just based off of that the switch in quarterback alone, just based off of the injured quarterback. It might even hit 17, 16.5. The Giants are still an NFL team, man, and they do have Saquon Barkley back, so likely they're probably going to be running the ball, and that's kind of what you want with a team that's getting a ton of points as a huge underdog. You want them to be controlling the ball. You want them to be running the ball and not letting the other team get possession of the ball that often. So I think that's probably going to factor into the Giants' game plan here. They have a good running back who can allow them to do that. And he will allow them to kind of take the burden off of their starting quarterback there, who is a rookie. That might help as well, because I think Arizona, when they had Tune out there, they didn't really have that, because I think James Conner was still out. He's coming back this week. With the Giants, though, I think Barkley is in there. Can take a little bit of the pressure off. I think the Giants are probably going to want to be focused just to atone for that awful performance that they had against the Cowboys, get that little bit of revenge against them. It's just too many points, really, to be laying in the NFL in most situations, man. The Giants are still an NFL team. It's so many points. Any given Sunday kind of factors in here. The NFL is still it's a league with a lot of parity. Like, the best and worst teams aren't really separated by that much in the NFL typically. So that's the only way that I'm going here. That is the way that I'm going here. I think a lot of the factors line up that I like to look for. Giants plus 16.5, or if there's a 17 out there and you happen to see a 17, I would go with it. I like the Giants. And those are going to do it for those two plays. So it's Houston Texans plus 7 and Giants plus 16.5. And we can comment on some of these other games real quickly. They're isolated games that we have going on this week. We have Panthers-Bears tomorrow night, Thursday, or later tonight, because it's early in the morning, Thursday morning. I'm staying up way too late yet again, although I think it'll be a little bit of an earlier night than it sometimes is. Panthers-Bears, man, who is scheduling these games? Who's going to want to watch this horrific, ugly game where the total's gone down to 38.5? Two teams that are just, they're just really just turning the ball over all over the place. Tyson Bagent, I don't know how you pronounce his name, for the Bears, turned it over so many times last week that even though they dominated New Orleans statistically, they still wound up losing the game because they were like -5 in turnovers, and I think at least 4 of those were on him. Just crazy. So you got him on one side, you got Bryce Young on the other side of this, where Bryce Young, I believe last week he threw more touchdowns to the Colts defense than he threw to his own team, which, yeah, that's really a winning recipe there. The Panthers outgained Indy, and unfortunately I had the Panthers as a pick in some of my pick'em pools, and really they should have won that game. They outgained Indy in that game, and it was the game was entirely because Bryce Young threw 2 pick sixes, and Carolina wound up losing by exactly that, by 14. And one pick six alone could arguably be worse than a 7-point swing, depending on where you throw the pick. So that was just ridiculous. So I don't know who's going to want to watch this game, who's going to want any part of this game, really. The Bears look like they've gone up from -1.5 to -3. Maybe it's based off of last week's results, really, though, because the Bears looked kind of good last week. Well, first of all, I will say that 53% of the tickets are on the Bears, with 54% of the cash looks like it's on them. I don't know if I buy that, because I would probably only lean to the Panthers here, because the Bears, they did play New Orleans kind of tough and lose that game close, and they outplayed New Orleans, like I said. So they played a pretty good game, and it was all turnovers that cost them that game. So they had a kind of a step-up game there against a team that was favored by like 8 points against them. So they're coming off that kind of a big effort game that the game still kind of went to the wire there. And they wound up covering at least. So they're coming off of that, whereas the Panthers are coming off looking a lot worse than they actually were, losing to Indy by 14, where all of that was on pick sixes, like fluke stuff, where the Panthers actually outplayed Indy in that game. The Panthers looked like they maybe started playing a little bit better once they got that first win under their belt, which I won on, by the way, against Houston coming out of that bye. So I would only look to the Panthers there because I think they're going to be the undervalued commodity. I think the Bears, if anything, they've moved from a 1.5 to a 3-point favorite just based off of those results last week. I'm not sure that it's warranted. I'm not sure that the Bears are actually even the better team out of these two teams. So I think I would only lean to the Panthers there, but I really don't want any part of that. Such a horrendous, ugly game. Then you got another game in Europe. When will these end, man? They're just scheduling more and more games in Europe. Please make it stop. It's not really great for betting purposes unless you find like a really good spot like I did in that one game where Jacksonville got a second week in a row over in London. So they had a huge advantage because of that and were able to beat the Bills because of that. So I did like that, but other than that, I hate these Europe games. I'm rarely going to be on them betting-wise, and this is another one of those. The Colts are playing the Patriots in Germany. This looks like the Colts have swung from a 1-point dog to a 1.5-point favorite, even though this says 62% of the tickets are on them, but 66% of the cash going the other way on the Patriots. And I think this line move might again be, I think maybe the look-ahead line might have been the Colts as a 1-point dog in this game, but now just based off of last week's results, they're a 1.5-point favorite because people saw the Colts beat the Panthers, like I just said. But the way they beat the Panthers, the Colts played horribly in that game. They got outgained by the Carolina Panthers. Minshew did not have a good game at all. Taylor didn't have a good game either. The Colts did not look good, even though their offense has looked pretty good throughout the season in a lot of these games. Maybe less so with Minshew than it did with Richardson, though. And they just looked better than they actually are in that, or were in that performance, at least, because that was all on the pick sixes in that game. That's the only reason they won that game against Carolina. They probably should have lost. And the Patriots just looked awful yet again. At home, they couldn't even beat Washington, where Washington was coming off a pretty big game, a step-up game where they blew it right at the end kind of against the Eagles, unfortunately, because I was on Washington in the game against the Eagles, and then I did not play the Washington Patriots game, but I did say that I leaned to the Patriots in that one last week just because Washington was coming off that step-up game, that big game. I didn't see how they would get up off the mat again for a road out-of-conference game like that against the Patriots, but they wound up winning in New England, and the Patriots just continue to look awful. And people are going to look at this and think this looks way too easy to take the Colts here. The Colts have the better record. They're certainly the better team, right? Well, the line in this game before last week's results was actually saying the Patriots are actually the slightly better team over the Colts, which is wild to think about. And I think the Patriots do certainly have the better defense. They don't have the better offense. The Colts, I think, you have to say the Colts have the better offense here, but the Patriots, I think, certainly have the better defense. So I'm leaning to the Patriots in this one. I think they have the better defense there. I think the Colts, as I said, the line has moved a bit just because of last week's results, which I think is an overreaction just to 1 week of results. The market looks like it's favoring the Patriots with the cash discrepancy on them, even though it looks like the ticket percentage is on the Colts, because I think the Colts are going to be the more public of these two teams here, getting more of the public action because there's nothing to like in what people have seen out of the Patriots at all. They've just looked ugly, really ugly, pretty much all year, whereas the Colts have been putting up a lot of high point totals. I think they're the only team in football that's scored over 20 in every game. That might be true, but again, like I said last week, they probably wouldn't have. That streak probably would have gone away if it wasn't for the defensive touchdowns they scored in that one. And adding to all that, as far as the Patriots are concerned, it is also the case that I think they might have the advantage being in a Europe game as well, even though maybe the guys in this current iteration of the Patriots don't really have experience doing it. Bill Belichick has experience coaching it, at least, and under his tenure, the Patriots have played in Europe 3 times, although I think, or no, they played in Europe twice, I think, both times in London, and they played in Mexico City once. But in these international games, they won all 3 of those games in complete blowout fashion, and I think only allowed 21 combined points across all 3 of those games, and won in blowouts in all of them. So Belichick seems to at least know how to coach teams in these international situations and get them ready for that, and might be the better coach as far as like overcoming the negatives, as far as like having to travel and deal with those like unfamiliar situations or whatever. Even though Belichick maybe isn't as good of a coach as we thought, man, because the Patriots have looked like an undisciplined team, very much so this year. They made a lot of mistakes that you would have thought were uncharacteristic for a Bill Belichick team. So I don't know, but his track record has been very good in these international games. And for the Colts, they do have Gardner Minshew, who did play 1 game in London, I believe, when he was the quarterback of Jacksonville back in 2019, I think is when it was. And he lost that game in a blowout. So that isn't a great indicator either. So there are a lot of things that have me leaning to the Patriots in this one, even though I don't really want to touch it. It's an ugly game, but I would only lean to the Patriots in that NFL game in Germany. Ugh, just horrendous. Other leans that I have, I do lean to the San Francisco 49ers. It looks like they're going up. They've gone up from a 2.5 to a 3, and it looks like it might be going through the 3. So I would try to get the 49ers. If you're going to lay the points, lay 3 or something below the 3 if you can. And maybe you can find like a money line on them that's somewhere around like minus 150 or something. Something around there, because I wouldn't want to let it get through the key number 3, really, but I do like the spot the 49ers are in this game quite a bit. They have 60% of the tickets, but 68% of the cash. So it looks like they might be a maybe like semi-public road favorite, which typically I wouldn't want to be on, but I think the situation definitely dictates this. The 49ers, nobody's liked what they've seen out of them recently. They've lost 3 in a row, and they went into the bye. When you go into a bye on such a horrible note like that, it tends to be a situation where it allows you to refocus. It allows you to change up your schemes, change up your game plans, fix what isn't working, and I think that's going to be a positive for the 49ers. And they're going to be getting some of their injured players back. Like Deebo Samuel, I believe, is coming back, even though I would say that, yeah, that might affect the line a little bit, and it's kind of that, like, reverse injured player theory situation might be in effect, but I don't think it's affecting the line that much to have him coming back. And I think, if anything, his value to their offense is actually more than might be reflected in the line, because he's a very versatile player on offense, and they've looked like they don't know what they're doing at all on offense without him. And so I think that's still going to be more of a positive for the 49ers, and I don't think the line has moved that much because of it, and also because the Jaguars are a team that has a really good record. So I think some people do like the Jaguars here. So I think the books can't like move the line too much towards the 49ers there to account for Samuel coming back, because I think they know that if they do that, they might get too much action coming in against that on the Jaguars at some point there. So that might be the case there. The 49ers, in those losses, like I said, they were a team that was having to deal with injuries. They were injury-ridden. I thought the spot that they were in the Browns game was a bad spot, which is why I had the Browns in that first loss that the 49ers took. It was a bad spot for the 49ers, a road out-of-conference game as well, and that was the game where they not only were in a bad spot, but they lost Christian McCaffrey and Deebo Samuel in that one. So they were out for the rest of that game. So that pretty much all of that explains that loss. So I wouldn't put that much stock into that loss, really. And Cleveland at least does have a really good defense. So I don't care that much about that loss. Then the 49ers did have that loss on that Monday night game, I think the primetime game in Minnesota. That was kind of a tough game for them to have to turn around and play as well. I think 49ers kind of had a target on their back, and they were still without Samuel in that one. And Minnesota was able to cover and win, actually, beat them outright in that one. So that happened. Then the 49ers still had to play without Deebo Samuel against a Cincinnati team who had a lot of momentum, and Cincinnati went into their house and beat them, man. So 49ers going into that bye on a really ugly note. They're able to heal up and change things that aren't working. So I think the bye is going to be a major positive for them. But on the other side, the Jaguars are on a huge win streak, and they're going into a bye on that huge win streak. And in that case, I think the bye is a negative, because what do you have to change? Everything's working for you. You don't really have much to work on. You don't have anything to really do, even though, yeah, it gives you an extra week to prepare for the 49ers, but you might not know what the 49ers are going to throw at you, because they haven't had Samuel in their lineup for the last few weeks. And him coming back, you might not know what they're going to throw at you with him back in there. So it might be tough for the Jaguars to totally game plan for them. And in addition to all that, I think this line looks maybe a little fishy, where it's like, why are the 49ers a favorite, a field goal favorite on the road at Jacksonville, even though Jacksonville has the better record, even though 49ers coming into the season, of course, everybody's thinking, yeah, they're one of the top teams in the NFL. And I still think they are that. But that, like, hype might have dwindled a little bit because of their recent performance. You tend to see a little bit of an overreaction from the betting public and in the line a little bit, maybe to what's happened most recently. And that might be the case here as well. So, yeah, I like the 49ers there. Like I said, I think that makes it look like the line is like a little fishy there, because it's like, why is the team with the worst record, even though people might still kind of, like, they realize the 49ers are a really good team, but I think people also think the Jaguars are a really good team at this point, and see those records and think, well, there might be some value taking points with the Jaguars here, thinking this is going to be a competitive game. I don't know about that. Most of the Jaguars' wins that they have in that win streak aren't that impressive. A lot of them are against kind of lesser teams in the NFL. And that one game they won against the best win that they have was the one against Buffalo. And that was that game that I mentioned where the Jaguars had a really big situational edge, where they were playing in London for the second straight week, so they got to just stay out there, whereas the Bills had to travel and adjust to the time zone difference going out there, and the Bills were off that huge game against the Dolphins that was kind of the Bills needed that game to stay in the run for the AFC East, because if they lost that game, Miami would have had a huge lead on them in the division. So Buffalo was in a really bad spot in that game. So that's, I think, why that explains kind of why the Jaguars are able to win that game. The Jaguars are certainly a pretty good team, but the line's telling you the 49ers are still kind of the significantly better team here, because they're laying points on the road. That might look suspicious to the recreational bettors, so might be a little bit of a trap, might look a little bit trappy there. I would only look to the 49ers there for all the reasons that I just stated. And what else we got here? I might have some opinions on some of these other games, but just talking about the other primetime games before I get out of here. How am I doing for time? Yeah, we'll finish this shortly. It'll go 40 or so minutes here. Jets at Raiders in the Sunday night game. It's like, man, can't you just, like, give us some, like, decent primetime games for once? The NFL is like, nah, we have the option to, like, maybe flex in a better game here, but we're not going to do that. We're going to give you the Jets and the Raiders. Have fun with that, NFL fans. So that's the Sunday night game. It looks like the Raiders have 85% of the tickets, but 75% of the cash, even though here it says the Raiders opened a 2.5-point underdog and have shifted to a 1-point favorite. But I think, again, that's over the course of the past week. I think the 2.5, I think that was a look ahead. I think the Jets were a 2.5-point favorite at the Raiders on the look ahead. And then just based off of last week's results, I actually think the line has moved that much to the Raiders being a 1-point favorite, and I have to think that that's just an overreaction, man. I would only look to the Jets in this one in the market. The cash discrepancy at least seems to agree with me here, but if you look at what happened last week, like I pointed out, the Raiders, when I talked about the Giants, the Raiders blew the doors off the Giants. The Raiders looked excellent in that game, but they're still the Raiders. They still suck, even though they do have a number of wins this season. I don't know how that's the case. The Raiders are still not a good team at all. Not a team that I would trust to be on really in any situation necessarily. But except for last week, I think they were in the best spot that you'll find with them. And maybe I should have played them in hindsight last week, because that was the game. Like I said, McDaniels had just been fired. They really stepped up for that game. But now after that game where they stepped up and they just destroyed the Giants wire to wire, coming off that game, they might just be like feeling that high. They were actually like celebrating that win. It's like, really, uh, a win against the Giants is something to celebrate? Yeah, I don't think so. I think the Raiders are too high off of that win that really doesn't mean that much, but it meant something to them because it was their first game with their new coach. But because of that, now they might be in a spot where maybe they might be facing a little bit of a letdown, I think, even though they do like playing for their interim coach here, whoever they have going there for their coach. They really do not like playing against McDaniels. I think it's an overreaction to what we saw in that game as well. The lines moved too much. There's not going to be value to be had on the Raiders when they won a game that convincingly. And like I pointed out, the Giants were also in a pretty bad spot in that one, too. I thought it was kind of a sandwich. But also people are going to look at that and say the Raiders just blew the doors off the Giants, who the Jets played the week before that and almost lost to them and had to go into overtime to even beat them. So that's going to do, like, bettors are going to do that syllogistic thing and think that, well, that means the Raiders destroyed the Giants, who the Jets had trouble with. So this is easy, right? You just need the Raiders to win this game. I don't think so. I think it looks too easy. And couple that with the fact that the Jets looked really ugly on primetime and everybody saw them. And I did think it was a spot where the Jets were going to come and play and at least put up a decent defensive performance. Their defense, I don't think, was awful in that game, but the offense was just miserable. And they did not win. They did not cover against the Chargers. But coming off all that and this line moving so much just based off of those recent results, I think it's gone too far. And again, I would only look to the Jets there. Jets are off of that ugly performance that everybody saw, and the Raiders are off of a win that looks too good, that makes them look too good. Nobody's going to want the Jets here. Nobody's going to want to watch this game. It's a 36 total, so not expecting a lot of offense in this one. Yeah, way to go. The line is still telling you the Jets are still the better team, even though the look ahead was telling you they're even more the better team than the Raiders there. The line is still telling you they are. It's only a 1-point Raider favorite in Las Vegas. It's going to kind of look suspicious, too, because people are going to look at those recent results and think the Raiders, like I said, are maybe the better team, and it just looks too easy to take them. But the line's telling you the Jets are actually still the better team, certainly the team with the better defense. So that's the only way I would look there. And finally, to finish it out, going way too long here, Broncos-Bills is the Monday night game, and I think both of these teams are in a bit of a negative, so I don't know which way I would even really kind of tend to lean in this one. The Bills are a 7.5-point favorite. It looks like it's gone down from 9, which might have been the look-ahead line on this one. I'm not sure. There's not that much of a difference between 7.5 and 9, really, anyway, though. 88% of the tickets, but 90% of the cash says that that's the case on the Bills. I'm not sure I buy that, but I do buy that the Bills are going to be getting more of the public action because the Broncos, even though they've looked better in their last couple of games, I don't think the betting public is really going to want much to do with the Broncos. But I think both teams are kind of in a negative here because for the Bills, well, what did we see? They're coming off a big game, that primetime game where I thought that the Bills are in that good spot, and they just lost it. Really, I think they just lost it on turnover. So now they're coming off that game. I think that's a negative. I don't know who they have up next, really, but I think it's a negative just coming off that game against the Cincinnati Bengals and having that, like, high, really, where you're playing for that, like, revenge against the team that knocked you out, and now you get you have that loss, and they do have the Jets up next. So they're coming off that big game against the Bengals where they fell short in that game where they could have exacted revenge against the team that ended their season last year. Now they get the Broncos, who just haven't really been doing much this year at all, even though they've looked better recently. And they do have the Jets up after that. And I think that's a bigger game than you might think. And then the Eagles, Chiefs, Cowboys, a bunch of bigger games coming up after that. They could actually be looking ahead to the Jets because the Jets are the team that beat them in the opening week of the season. So even though it was at New York, Buffalo still might be looking ahead to that a little bit and still might take the Jets seriously because they did beat them, even though it was with Aaron. Well, it wasn't really with Aaron Rodgers. He started that game, but he was out of the game like almost immediately. So yeah, I think Buffalo might have one eye looking ahead on the Jets there, and I think it might be difficult for them to like bounce back that quickly from that Bengals loss there. But also the Broncos, I think, they're in kind of a negative and kind of a letdown spot as well. Although I think they're probably in the less negative spot because they're coming out of a bye. But that bye I don't think is that much of a positive for them because they went into it on a 2-game win streak So like I said, when you go into a bye on a win streak, it tends to disrupt your momentum a little bit. So that's kind of a negative. But what did they do going into that bye? They beat the Kansas City Chiefs, one of the top teams in the NFL, and the team that's leading their division. Big time rivalry game. It was kind of quick revenge as well because they had lost at Kansas City in a game that they kind of played them close and tough. The Denver's defense is playing much better in these last few games, at least. The Chiefs' offense hasn't looked like that typical Mahomes offense that we're used to seeing in recent years. But even so, they stepped up and they had that big game against the Chiefs and were able to beat them and went into the bye on that. So I think that's kind of a negative as well, although they do have an extra week to prepare still, and it is a game against the Buffalo Bills still, which they don't really have anything else to focus on here, and the Bills are still one of the top teams in the AFC, at least considered to be. So I do still think I would slightly lean to the Broncos. They're taking the points, but really, yeah, I think both teams are kind of in a negative here. And the Bills, I think that 9-point favorite that they were, I think was the look ahead on this. So it's actually gone down a little bit based off of just the Bills playing last week and losing on primetime. I think it's actually caused it to go down a little bit to 7.5. I don't know, but those are my feelings on a bunch of those games there. Hopefully, again, that's like good information. The two actual plays that I'm on are the Houston Texans +7. Hopefully, you can still find those stray sevens that are out there. I still like it at 6.5, too. I think it's a bad sandwich spot for the Bengals. And the New York Giants +6.5, 16.5. Sorry, doesn't get uglier than that, but I think Dallas is just in a huge hangover spot. And it's in-season road revenge of like the worst kind for the Giants, having lost them by 40. And the injured player theory is going on with the Giants switching to the rookie quarterback as well, getting a ton of points. Those are the plays that I like. That's going to do it. I'm Toad, Tower Gang Toad on Twitter. I'm Better Off Dead, of course. I'm one of the hosts of the Tower Gang podcast, which is the most offensive podcast and hilarious podcast in existence. We had a nice episode tonight. Really made me laugh for sure. Tonight's episode, it was a lot of fun. So check that out. We're on all the major platforms pretty much. Spotify, YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble. You can support us on Locals, towergang.locals.com. Go to towergangpod.com for all of the links to it. And I'll shout out my guys at flapper.net, F-L-A-P-P-R, flapper.net. They have a blog and a Twitter account, and I don't know what else they do really, but they are in the like liberty / comedy / sports / women sphere like I am. So they enjoy all of those things, and so do I. We're all bros here. We like to bro out. We like to make each other laugh, talk about sports, maybe occasionally talk about politics, sometimes do the political thing, talk about liberty, I guess at least, and talk about ladies. So that's what we like to do. Flapper, good guys over there. It's going to do it for me. Have a good week. Hopefully we cash some of these tickets, man. Have a better week than we did last week. Peace. Deuces.